feel like I'm kind of like constricted here, like I'm supposed to be on CNN during election season or something. Good morning, everyone. So we have Austin in New York right now as well. Is that what it is? Cool, guys. So I kind of want to introduce myself a little bit. My name is Andy Nacin. I'm an open source web developer and an evangelist. And I'm really, really happy to be here. Daniel, thank you so much for inviting me. This is kind of going to be hopefully a really good day for you guys. As Daniel said, I work for Matt Mullenweg, the founder of WordPress at his angel investment and research firm, Audrey Capital, which is really interesting because Matt's been very successful in the field. He has invested in quite a number of different properties through this firm, and he's also the founder of Automatic, the company behind WordPress.com. And at this point, he's also now hired a few developers to be able to more or less just do research and development. So I actually work on open source all day for pretty much a living. It's really cool. I'm basically just doing nonprofit work, just getting paid for it. It's really interesting. And I kind of want to explain how I got there, a little bit about my story today. So I'm going to start with this. This is kind of like a general statement that just WordPress rocks. But I'm actually not going to talk about WordPress too much at all today. I'm actually just going to kind of talk about what I've done for the 8 or 9 years now. I'm young. I'm 22 years old, and I've been programming since I was probably 12. So actually, I kind of missed the whole teens aspect here. I kind of want to talk a little bit about open source in the sense that open source rocks. But it's actually more than just that. I mean, we're talking more about software here, or at least I am today. We're talking actually more about community in the sense that the major idea here is that the community behind these projects is actually truly what is driving a lot of the innovation. And I mean, community in many cases comes in many different forms. So we have this idea that you have all these different projects and they're all built behind these different technologies. But it's actually really not just about that. Many of you perhaps have participated on a number of different sites, whether it's forums or blogs or something like Stack Overflow, that these are all different communities that are focused around technology. But at the same time, I don't want you guys to think that it is about the technology. It actually is way more than just what language you're using or what software you're running. It's actually really in many cases about an idea. And it might be an idea for a product or an idea for a service, but more so it's actually going to be an idea about the ideals behind, in this case, open source. Open source in most cases is about a passion. It's about really most people work on open source to more or less solve an itch. And that's really what's happening here in the idea of working for open source. And people are doing their passion. I actually joke sometimes that Matt stole my hobby. Because it's actually very true in the sense that I used to do this just for fun, and now of course I collect a paycheck for it. And open source, of course, is about the freedoms. The term open source has actually come out of a practical movement in the late 90s, but it actually started in the early 80s as much more of a philosophical movement called free software. And this idea of free is in speech rather than beer, although that doesn't play, I guess, that well in this crowd. But the idea is that you have the freedom, as in liberty, to have rights to the software. Open source is really powerful, but I actually wasn't always starting with open source. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about my story and how I actually cut my teeth on community and actually learning a lot of this stuff. And it has this pattern over and over again. It has this pattern where you have this idea, you have this project that you want to do. And you want to then, you need to then seek knowledge because you don't know how to do it. Something happens in there in the middle. You might or may not reach profit, but ultimately the big thing is that you always need to be pushing yourself to learn something new, whether it's a new technology or a new idea. I am basically 100% a PHP developer, but that doesn't mean that I necessarily define myself that way. I don't. I define myself as a developer, and in many cases, to me, programming is about means to an end. It's about creating solutions. I don't program just for fun. I actually try to create solutions and fix problems for fun. And so I actually started around 2002, maybe even earlier, doing databases. And it's kind of a funny story because my dad collects CDs of live concerts, and he needed a way to actually categorize all this information. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, but I didn't want to use Excel, and so I decided to use a program called Microsoft Access. And through this, I actually was able to learn Visual Basic, I was able to learn SQL, I was able to learn all these different technologies. And actually what ended up happening is that as I worked through each individual technology, I was able to realize, oh, I need more power. Oh, I need to build this kind of a module. I need to learn how to write code. The funny thing is that 11 or 9 years later, that database was never completed. And I spent probably 6 months overcomplicating it, but all of the different things that I learned along the way really did pay off as it kept going. And that is just kind of important, is that never pass up an opportunity to learn. I don't mean accept every chance that you get to build something free for your family, but when you have an opportunity to, hey, this is something really cool, can you do this for me? You'd be very surprised that just throwing a little bit of code at it or something can be really helpful. And that actually comes along, that plays in later as well. And of course, you have to start somewhere. This idea that, I started using Microsoft Access. In many ways, I kind of embarrassed about that because it's not a very good piece of software, certainly not, in this day and age. But it was something I learned, and a lot of the different experiences that I had while learning it really does help me now, and it still applies now. I learned, relational databases and things like that while actually working with this software, despite the fact that it's old. And in 2003, I actually started getting involved in communities. And the earliest community that I actually was involved in was a site called Experts Exchange that most of you probably have heard of. Experts Exchange is in many ways a precursor to Stack Overflow. This is 5 years before Stack Overflow. The site was actually founded in 1996, which is 12 years before that. And I actually got involved just because I started, answering questions about access, because that's what I knew. And I, was asking questions about, why my computer wouldn't work. And it's an interesting format, but ultimately they have, 3 or 4 million members at the time, and tens of thousands of questions a day, and a moderator team of 10. And they had no idea that I was a month shy of my 15th birthday when they brought me onto the moderator team. They probably assumed I was in my mid-20s. But the point is, I was actually on this team, working with all these guys, volunteering, just helping out a community. And in this case, I really cut my teeth on working with support, working through just community ideals, community values, and dealing with all these different experts across the world on just different aspects of this. You will one day be on a larger stage than you can handle. You are going to be put into a pair of shoes that are too big for you. That's okay, because the best thing that you could possibly do is relish it, is actually use that advantage, use that to your advantage, and actually grow into that situation. So in this case, I was at this point where, I was 15 years old dealing with guys, who were in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who were developing for a living, and here I am just, this is my hobby when I get home from, junior high. It's quite an interesting perspective, and actually, eventually it started to go in many ways against, a lot of the other things I was working on. I just didn't have time to do a lot of other stuff. And so eventually I moved on from that. I did a lot of academic research in high school, and so in order, for the academic research, which was what HTML in many ways was invented for, I started learning, HTML and CSS, actually building out web pages. The interesting thing is that I was planning on going to college. I graduated high school in 2006, planning on going to college to study political science or international affairs and continue research and things of that nature. I still haven't really considered programming to be necessarily a profession or something that I necessarily wanted to get into. Even when I got into college, I majored in biological anthropology, which, while it's fun to study, certainly nothing that I actually wanted to pursue for a career. But with this HTML and CSS, I was actually I was using Internet Explorer 6, by the way, because I didn't know any better, because 7 wasn't out yet. All these, this just, it's actually just kind of interesting how, I look back many years ago and realize how many things I was doing wrong, even though I thought I was, doing everything right. And then finally in 2005, I took a further step in the wrong direction and was using ASP.NET to actually develop websites. So for my senior project in high school, I prototyped a new website for the school. And so I decided, I was actually told, you should really use PHP and MySQL. I said, well, I don't know what those are, but I do know what Visual Basic is, and this is kind of like the web version of Visual Basic. So I started coding with this. Probably a bad idea at the time, but at the same time, I'm actually starting to finally learn the web paradigm, still in my little Microsoft environment rather than in the open source environment. And then in 2006, once I got to college, I kind of entered this area where I was actually finally putting these skills to the test. I worked at the National Archives, which is kind of cool, but I was then doing records maintenance, which is probably pretty much as boring as it sounds. But one thing that we did is that we had a program in Microsoft Access that did labeling for boxes of records. And it was horrible. And so I spent a weekend just completely writing something from the ground up. And as of last year, they actually still use it in an office of about 40 different people. It's really cool that I probably haven't touched the piece of software since then, but I'm able to learn I was able to learn a lot of different things and actually finally apply a lot of that to a real life situation. And finally in 2007, I entered the web, which is about time really. I don't really count my previous excursions into that because it really wasn't that great. Excuse the irony here, but I actually started replying to a print classified in my student newspaper advertising a web manager position. That's actually how I got involved in doing this. And so I had a summer basically to completely redesign a site. And that's, a lot of HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And then, by 2008, I'm finally working on WordPress. We had a lot of blogs. I had to start, maintaining these. And so I'm working with WordPress and PHP here and there. And many people do learn PHP through WordPress. It happens. I'm one of them. I was already a programmer, which is not always the case. But this is actually how I started to learn. One of my best friends actually introduced it to me originally, and he's now also an open source developer. Now, one thing though that's kind of important is that, I mean, at the time I was working for a newspaper. I eventually was like, hey, I'm going to go work in the web newsroom of the New York Times. That's where I want to be. I wanted to be in New York. And so I kind of had defined myself as, I'm a web producer, I'm a new media journalist, I had done computer-assisted reporting, maybe a web designer who can't design, but at least I can make it work. And eventually one day I realized after, programming nonstop, I said, you know what, I'm actually a web developer. I can actually do this. So it's important to define yourself on a business card, on a resume, in different areas, but at the same time, you kind of have to you don't want to have that definition restrict what you can do. And again, it's not about the technology, it's about the idea and the passion. So, I mean, I don't define myself as a PHP developer. I take it much further than that. I just say, I like the web, I like open source, I like evangelism. And that said, also, of course, pursue your passions. I had mentioned that I majored in anthropology, which is nowhere near what I'm doing now. And I actually didn't end up finishing my degree simply because the opportunities that were presented for me made sense to me. Stay in school, guys, but nonetheless, I mean, it did work for what I was doing. With taking that one step further is also make sure that you create a balance. You're in high school, you're in college. I probably spent college, 50 or 60 hours a week working for a newspaper and like 5 hours a week on college, which probably explains why I just never graduated. And at the same time in high school, my teachers understood that I was going home and instead of working on homework, I was actually doing research, which they enjoyed, and I was also, programming and building stuff like that. So, but trying to create some sort of a balance is really important. And so finally in 2009, I'm actually entering the realm of open source. And I started actually really late in 2009. I subscribed to a mailing list. And it's probably the best way to get involved, not even in open source, but just in trying to learn something, trying to absorb something. And through this, with open source, I'm able to start reading all of these mailing lists. And I'm starting able to read, every commit that's going into WordPress, for example, every code change. And I'm starting to read the bug tracker. And I'm kind of getting a little obsessed with all of this data. And what ends up happening is that you realize that you're actually interacting with some of the best developers in the world. I've written code that, here's 50 lines, and then someone comes by and says, not only is this not needed, but here's like 2 lines to do the exact same thing. You're able to learn just so much more just by watching and just absorbing all of the information that you can possibly read. And it's really great. I actually learned more in the 3 months or so leading up to contributing for the first time than I had learned in 3 previous years of working on the web. And I had also learned more in the first 3 months of contributing than I had in 3 years on the web. And, but it is actually more than code. And so I had contributed my first line of code to WordPress on November 16th, 2009. And I forwarded it to my friend. I was like, hey, yeah, look at this. But it's actually way more than that. It's in many ways about knowledge. It's about community. Some of my best friends now are in the WordPress community. I mean, I see them, every few weeks. I live here in DC. I work remotely, but I mean, I see them at conferences and I see them all, all across the world. But I mean, really, like, it's more than code just because of, all of the different things that you can actually learn and then apply. The idea of, let's say if programming isn't a profession, or, instead of working for a technology company, you can always apply that in basically any other industry, the same way that you could apply, a law degree to basically any other industry. And ultimately what it is it's the community. It makes a lot of sense as, working through a community, it's a group of people online. And, yes, there have been chat rooms for years and everything else, but ultimately I mean, the internet's obviously becoming a natural extension of our lives. It's not, a second life in many cases. And so it's really, really nice to be able to have an entire backbone. So I started contributing in November 2009. The core team of 6 met a few weeks later, and they decided that they wanted to add 2 people to the team. So they added someone who was on the project for 3 years, and they added me, who had been on the project for less than 3 months. They took a chance. They gave me some giant shoes that I needed to fill. And ultimately, I mean, I've tried my hardest to get to that point. This team had actually been together for anywhere from 3 to 6 years. And suddenly they said, well, you know what? I mean, why not? I mean, we needed someone else. This guy, you know, he's doing a good job. Let's see if he can do it. And so, you know, that's kind of what happened. And, you know, now it's in many ways, it's what's next. I've been involved in day-to-day WordPress development now for more than a year and a half. 368 days after my first code contribution, I accepted a job where I am now. And now I actually work full-time for an open source project, for one of the most successful open source projects in the world. And so I think really in many cases what's next is that we all have common goals. We all have common ideals. And for the most part, I mean, this expands, you know, into open source, you know, directly. Common goals with, you know, with that, it has to do with, you know, the freedoms that we're all sharing. And so we're sharing all these different freedoms. And so, I mean, so for example, with, you know, with WordPress, is that you can modify it however you wish, you can distribute it however you wish, you can change it, as long as, of course, whoever you send it to has the exact same freedoms that you have. And so this idea of, you know, a particular piece of software, really it's way more beyond that. It's just an entire area of software, you know, free software, and how free software can actually succeed over proprietary software. And also, you know, just beyond that, you know, those of you who are developers, if you have like a GitHub account and you're throwing code up on there, you know, in many cases the common goals aren't just, you know, building awesome products. It's also pursuing your goal, your own personal goals and your own passions. And in a way, that's actually a common shared goal. And so you becoming a better developer, you fixing a problem, you having someone else help you fix a problem, it really does help a lot. With that, I'd like to thank you guys very much today. No questions, I guess? Is that how it works?
No
so, guys, thank you very much. Andy Nacin, WordPress core developer. Really appreciate it. Daniel, thank you.